All right, so we're in the middle of a series on suffering. Now, suffering is one of those interesting things to talk about. I just don't know how many of you were waking up this morning and thinking to yourself, "Oh, cool! I know Craig is talking about suffering. I just cannot wait to get there." In fact, I think we may go to both services, maybe hit the 6 o'clock service too, just because I love to hear about suffering. This is what the church is all about. So last week we started off and we really looked at just a few truths of life. Okay, so truth of life number one is that pain in life is going to be inevitable. Okay, so you guys got that? Pain is going to happen. Do you agree with it? It just happens. Pain is real. So suffering then is going to be unavoidable. Suffering is unavoidable. That's going to happen as well. And AJ and the band sang a song last week called "Everybody Hurts," and everybody hurts sometimes. It's going to be impossible to make it through life without hurting at least some of the time. Now, one of the things we looked at last week was that sometimes, think about this, sometimes life is going to be, it's just going to be easy and it's going to be fun. It's going to be joyful. It's just going to be natural. Now, some of the time, life is going to be painful and difficult. That's just the way it works out. Sometimes life is going to be both painful and difficult. Now, when I talk about suffering, I think that, and I don't want you to do this, but I think that many of us just kind of default, okay, suffering. He's probably going to talk about death, serious disease, depression, divorce, maybe some type of addiction, those really, really big things. And as I look out here, I can see right now that some of you are going through those really big things because I know your story. And I would also say that there's probably a few stories I don't know out here just because, there's so many of you. And maybe this is part of your narrative. This is part of your story right now. Now, here's where I want you to go with this. So, if you're not going through, death in a family member right now, if you're not going through divorce, if you're not going through depression, if you're not going through, some kind of major disease, but you still have pain, well, your pain is still real. Don't just say, well, I'm really struggling with loneliness right now, or I'm really struggling with anger right now, but my issues aren't nearly as bad as his issues. I mean, gosh, he's got cancer, and his kid and him aren't getting along. So I guess compared to him, I'm blessed. Don't say that. Your pain is real. Your pain is your pain. It's your story. It's where you are right now. Deal with it. And let God help you deal with it. So suffering is going to be so much more than those big things. For some of us. Suffering is going to be resentment. If you carry around resentment too long, that's going to just get really tiresome for you. It could be guilt. Guilt is something that we carry toward ourselves. Loneliness. You deal with that one for a while. It's going to be tough. And you could be by yourself, or you could be in the middle of a large group of people that love you and that you love, and you can still feel totally lonely. Not being wanted. There could be relational stress. There could be dreams coming true. There could be anxiety or worry or stress about what tomorrow might bring. Now, just because your pain and your suffering isn't as bad as somebody else's, it doesn't diminish it or make it not real. Now, one of the things that I've observed in life is that pain and suffering, weakness, it can do things. It can do some things that prosperity and blessing cannot. So pain and suffering are going to do some things in our life that prosperity and blessing cannot do. It really does. Now, I think the main thing that it does is that it can help us grow in our dependence, our trust, our faith, and our reliance upon God. I really believe that. Now, let's go back. Look at the year 2000 all the way to 2015. What do you think is the Sunday that there was more people in church on any Sunday than any other Sunday? It was going to be September 16th of 2001. There was more people in church that day than there was on any Easter, any Christmas Eve. I remember I was the pastor of a small church in northwest Iowa. It was a small church, so I had a part-time job. I was a chaplain at a mental health institute, so I was working at a mental health institute on the Tuesday of September 11th when it happened. I remember, watching those airplanes crash into those buildings, with these men and women that had deep depression and schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. That was how my day was spent. We got back that night, and I tried to throw a real quick worship service together. Now, this was a large sanctuary at this church, but it was a fairly small congregation, and it's usually like, I remember like my first Sunday there, it was like, it was like half full and it was the back half. So it was like me, then like about 30 pews, then like about 30 pews filled with people. And I actually like just took the lectern and I'm like, yes, I'm going to. So I talked and I went on the floor and then we tried to rope it off. Then they were going to like threaten to excommunicate me. So, I always talked in this deep stained glass voice to these people that were way back there. And that day though, like, I was just in over my head. I remember like I got there and the parking lot was full. I don't think I'd ever seen the church that full before. There may have been one funeral that was pretty close to that. It was, I remember like, when we were up there talking though, like the place, I mean, it was interesting, like when we were looking at the people, and I really sensed this, like people were saying like, I need a word from God. Yeah, I don't know what the future holds. I need God's nearness in my life right now. And what's going to happen is suffering and pain, anxiety, they're going to do that to us. They're going to move us, closer to God in our relationship with Him. Now, it hasn't changed. Like, I remember a couple of months ago, I was leading a staff meeting for a church in Lincoln, and I was trying to get to know them a little bit better. So I asked all the staff, like, what's like the season of your life that you've grown closest in your relationship with God? Now, what I was expecting is that people were going to say, maybe it was like a camp experience that I went to as a kid, or maybe it was, like I started coming to this church, or I joined a small group, whatever it was. But there was probably about 15 people on that staff, and 15 people with no exceptions told about like how their hardship had grown their relationship with God. Their suffering had grown their relationship with God. One of the people said, it was the day I found out that I had cancer. Then, the next 2 or 3 years as I went through that recovery time, that God just really spoke to me and drew me into Him. There was another person that was actually arrested, and he was saying, it was behind bars in this little, 8x10 cell with like 4 other people that I realized I had nowhere else to turn except God Himself. Another person that was a divorce, another person that was a death of a parent. It just went down the line, and every single one of them, without exception, would say it was during that time of hardship that they grew most in their relationship with God. Now, C.S. Lewis, he's an English theologian from last century. One of the things that he said is, he says that we are promised sufferings. We actually looked at that last week where Jesus says you will have trials and tribulations. So C.S. Lewis says, we are promised sufferings. They are part of the program. We were even told, now Jesus said this, Lewis is quoting Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. He said, blessed are they who mourn. So when Jesus says, blessed are they who mourn, what Jesus is trying to communicate to us is that this is a potential for growth in our relationship with God. It's a potential for growth in our faith, in our dependence, in our trust upon the one who will always be. Now, James, in chapter 4, verse 8, I want you to just look at this. It says, come close to God, and God will come close to you. Now, this is a promise. James is making this promise, and he says that when we come close to God, what is going to happen is God is going to come close to us. Now, last week, we looked at the question, why? Why does suffering happen? We specifically looked at it in Job's case. Job is a book in the Old Testament. Now, we're going to just look at just not specifics here, but 2 general reasons why suffering happens. Now, one of the reasons why suffering is going to happen, it is because of us. Some suffering in our life today is going to happen because of us. I remember hearing a story one time about this pastor, and he was just like really burned out. And it was like Saturday, and he didn't want to write a sermon. He didn't want to go to church the next day. I've never experienced either of those, but this is just a story. It's someone else. It's not me. And so he called like a retired pastor. And like retired pastors, like these guys are just hungry to preach. They've been doing this for 40 years. They just can't wait to get back. So they'll come. I mean, you call a retired pastor, they'll be here like the next day. So this guy decided that he was going to go out golfing. So like God and Moses were up like having this conversation, and Moses is like, hey, this isn't cool. Like this pastor, like he should be with his church, and he's out golfing. And God says, yeah, I'm going to get him good. So this pastor, like, he's not that great of a golfer. I mean, none of us are good golfers. We just, like, when I golf with people, I intentionally play bad just to make you feel good as part of my ministry to you. It's not that I have no hand-eye coordination. I couldn't hit a ball more than 80 yards if my life depended on it. But this guy, like, all of a sudden, like, on the first hole, he got like a birdie. And, like, Moses says, why aren't you you said you're going to punish him. And, you know, so he got to the 17th hole, and he was 3 under par. And Moses is, like, questioning God. He's like, okay, this is not, I mean, he's 3 under par. Like, you said you're going to punish him. He said, I'm really going to get him this hole. It's a par 4. It's 430 yards, and I'm going to have him get a hole in one. It's like Moses, he doesn't understand. So the guy goes up. He hits the ball 430 yards in the hole. Gets a hole in one. So Moses said, God, I don't understand this. He just shot like 7 under. He got a hole in one on a par 4. How is this punishment? Then God says, well, he's skipping church, and he can never tell anybody about this. It's like in this case, like this guy's actually going to suffer. You know, he's going to suffer because this whole thing was fabricated on something that wasn't real. Now, some suffering is going to happen to us because of us. Now, you've made decisions in your life. You've said words. We've had choices that we have made that have very like negative consequences. What these choices and decisions, what they're going to do is they're going to move us to these barren lands of guilt and shame and resentment and fear and embarrassment. Now David knew about this. You guys know who David is. Think about like, you know, David and Goliath. David takes the slingshot and he shoots the mighty Philistine giant with a single river stone. And, you know, Jerusalem, you've heard the city before, that was David's idea. David was the city planner. He was a military general. He pretty much had it all. And then, like, all this stuff just entered David's life, and David started making bad choice after bad choice. He actually killed a person. You know, he tried to hide all this stuff, and he thought he had it pretty much hidden. But then one day there was a prophet that went to knock on the door of David's castle. And like when the prophet knocks on the door of the house, you answer it. David let Nathan in, and Nathan, he started to tell David this really obscure story. And he said, you know, David, there's this wealthy landowner, and he has all these sheep and all this livestock and all these lambs, and he's having some company come over. And instead of taking one from his own flock, do you know what he did? Like, there's this guy across the street, and he went and he took his only little lamb. It's like a pet to him. It's not even livestock. It's like a pet. And then he fed that to this family. Can you believe that? And like David used to be a shepherd, and Nathan knew like he was going to get to David with this, and David was furious. And David said, like, this man deserves to die. He shall restore fourfold what he has taken. And then Nathan looked at David, and he said, David, you're the man. This is you. Now, listen to what happens next in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, now listen to what Nathan's reply is. This is for all of us who have sinned. Yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you will not die for this sin. Nevertheless, you're going to be showing nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the word of the Lord by doing this, your child will die. Now, right now, I think a few of you probably have like some theological questions, don't you? Like, why would a child die for the sin of a parent? Like, this makes no sense. This makes no sense, but I'll tell you what, this is everyday life. Every day, there's kids who suffer because of the choices of the parents. It's just the way things are. You know, so if a dad abuses a mom, who do you think suffers? Everybody suffers, including and especially the kids. You know, if a woman like is overextended and she self-medicates with drinking a bottle of wine every night, who do you think suffers? It's the kids who suffer. I mean, God is just pointing out a human reality that, yeah, the forgiveness of sins is totally real. It is totally real, but there are consequences to our sins. I mean, we see this all the time. Now, this conversation with Nathan, it was just the beginning of David's problems. It really was. I mean, David had to wake up every day for the rest of his life. David had to wake up every day for the rest of his life knowing that he killed Uriah. And that had to be a bitter pill to swallow. He had to, day by day, pick up the pieces of his broken life. And like some of us, we can relate to this. Like we've said something that we wish we wouldn't have said, and the relationship has never been the same since that point. We've responded to anger in the wrong way, and we carry the heavy weights of regret on our shoulders. Some of us have self-medicated so improperly that we find that this addiction has some type of stranglehold that is on us. Some of our suffering is because of us. Now, I want you to hear the second point because it's equally as important as the first point. Sometimes, number two, some suffering just happens. Sometimes suffering, it just happens. So some of you are suffering right now and it's not your fault. It just isn't. You get a phone call from the doctor and you didn't do anything out of the ordinary, and it's not your fault that you have a disease. It's not your fault that you're sick. Some of us, we might be sad and we carry this depression with us. It's not your fault that you're dealing with this. It's not your fault when a loved one dies. It's not your fault that you might sit around waiting for the phone to ring or the phone to light up with a message and it just doesn't come. That's not your fault. Now, some of our suffering is our fault, but much of our suffering is not our fault. Now, I'm going to look at the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. So, in verse 1, Jesus was walking along. He saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Now, they're programmed to think the same way that Job's friends were programmed, and we looked at that last week. Why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins? Or was it because of his parents' sins? And then Jesus answered, this happened to him so that the power of God could be seen. It wasn't the parents. It wasn't his sin. He was just born blind. Sometimes suffering happens and it's not our fault. So I was reading an article in Sports Illustrated. This is probably about 10 years ago. It was one of the writers for Sports Illustrated. He was just happened to be attending a high school state track meet. I think it was in Florida. And he was there. I think his nephew, if I remember right, was like a hurdler or some type of relay runner or something like that. And he was just there to support the family. And the women's or the girls, the big class, the 3,200 meter run was the event that was going on. And most races are pretty predictable. A few runners will kind of take off, but everyone's fairly close. And after one lap, there was a girl in this race who was almost a third of a lap behind everybody else. After a couple laps, she had already been lapped by some of the faster runners. The fast runners had finished, and she was on her fifth lap at the time. Now, everyone here is wondering what in the world's going on. How does this girl qualify for this meet and now run this slow? So word spread like wildfire. He reported throughout the stands that this girl was actually one of the best runners in the country. She had one of the I think she had the second fastest qualifying time for this actual race. But that was after her first race of the season. A couple weeks after that, she just started to feel really tired and weak. She went to the doctor. They discovered that this 17-year-old runner had a fairly fast-growing type of cancer that was inside of her. Obviously her season was over. She started to do the treatments, and she talked to the doctor about a week before the state track meet, and she says, I've qualified for this race. I know I'm not going to be able to compete or anything, but is it all right with you if I go run this race because I want to finish what I started? And the doctor kind of moved her schedule around a little bit for the treatments and said, yeah, I want you to run this race. So it came time for her last lap. The race had been done by 3 minutes at this point. And this girl was stumbling. She had 400 meters to go. And all of a sudden, everyone, they had found out what was going on, and they rise to their feet. And it took her 3 or 4 minutes to run the last lap, he said, and they just gave this girl this standing ovation, and they didn't stop. And what he says in his article, it's the heart of the gospel. I love what he said. He said, I'm never going to remember the runner who finished first, and I'm never going to forget the runner who finished last. Now listen to what Jesus says. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. So much of our suffering happens, and Jesus says it is not because of the sins of the parents. It's not because of the sins of him. It is because God can be glorified. Now, therefore, number 3, moralizing suffering is not helpful and enslaves an already hurting person. So when we try to moralize suffering, what this is going to do is this is going to enslave an already hurting person. Now, Job's friends believed the same thing that the people who were talking to Jesus believed. They believed that good things happen to good people. They believed that bad things happen to bad people. Since all these bad things happen to Job, therefore Job is a bad person. That's what they believed. So what they try to do is they try to convince Job of all these bad things, and it's his fault. Like they're saying, Job, you got something wrong. There's a skeleton in your closet, and you got to come clean. So let's read Job chapter 22, verses 5 through 9. So this is one of Job's 3 friends talking to him, and with friends like this, who needs enemies? It's because of your wickedness. There's no limit to your sins. For example, you must have lent money to your friend and demanded clothing as security. Yes, you stripped him to the bone. You must have refused water to the thirsty and food for the hungry. You probably think the land belongs to the powerful and only the privileged have the right to it. You must have sent the widows away empty-handed and crushed the hopes of the orphans. So can you imagine going through this really tough time in life? Then all of a sudden you got someone that's trying to moralize it and say, well, you had to have done something wrong. I mean, things like this don't happen to good people. This is only going to enslave us. It's only going to make things more difficult. It's not going to be helpful at all. Now, some of us have some things that we wish we could have done differently, and even being reminded of that's not going to help us. It doesn't change the dilemma that we're in. And if we're suffering for no reason, it makes it unbearable. I mean, suffering by ourselves is hard enough. Suffering with the insults of others, I mean, it just makes it. So there's 2 things that we can look at doing. Number 1, this is number 4 on our list this morning. Here's our action plan. Number 4 is that forgiveness and second chances are both free and available. They are. Forgiveness and second chances are both free and available. So let's look at this one. Micah chapter 7, verse 19. I love this verse. Once again, you will have, and so here's Micah is actually talking to God, and the people are overhearing. Once again, you will have compassion on us. You will trample our sins under your feet and throw them to the depths of the ocean. Look at those last few words there, the depths of the ocean. So do you guys remember that plane crash last year, the Malaysia Air one? They were headed up north, and it got turned around, the plane is probably somewhere down by Australia. Do you know that with all the technology that we have today, that they have not found that airplane yet? It's still at the depths of the ocean, and it may always be there. We may never find this thing. Now, this is a powerful metaphor when all of a sudden, this is what God does to our sin. God will throw our sin to the depths of the ocean so that it is no more. We have the second chance. So David, let's look at him. David got a second chance. David, after this event happened, he was never quite the same again. But if you read through the Psalms, some of the most amazing literature, some of the most powerful and prophetic literature that you'll ever read was written by David after his conversation with Nathan. Think about Matthew in the New Testament. Matthew was a tax collector. He was a bully. He was a thug. He was someone that just stole money from people and abused his power. Jesus gave him a second chance. And Matthew is the author of a book that more people have read than any other people have ever read any book in the history of the world, the Gospel of Matthew. Paul, he watched Stephen be stoned to death, and he didn't do anything about it. Yet Paul is really the father of the early church. He's the one that wrote Romans. He's the one that wrote Corinthians. He's the one that wrote the letters to Timothy and the people in Philippians and Ephesians. God gives second chances. You know that? He does. And, for some of us that are slow to catch on, God is going to give us a third chance and a fourth chance and a fifth chance. And if we've made those choices, if we've said those words, if we've done those things that we wish we could hit the reset button, God is going to keep giving us forgiveness, and God is going to keep giving us more chances until we get it right. It's called grace. We haven't earned it. We don't deserve it. It only freely comes from Him. We can only receive it. Now, the last thing I want us to look at, forgiveness and second chances are both free and available. The last thing is that God's presence let's look at this one. God's presence is near, and God's nearness is here. Now, we're going to go back to the beginning here. Like, I really believe that when we're suffering, when we experience pain, when life is tough, I really believe that this is the time of our life that we can grow the closest to God. Let's look at Psalm 34, verse 18. I love this verse. This is one of my favorite. If I'm ever going through a tough time, this is the one that I go to. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Look at that. If you're brokenhearted, the Lord is close to you. If your spirits are crushed, He's coming to rescue you. He's coming to save us. Now, I think I told this story a few years ago when it happened, but it just fits perfectly this morning. So Benjamin, my son, and I, we've done this communion service at this local nursing home. It's the Good Samaritan Nursing Home on Q Street, probably about like 125th or 130th or something. So on Fridays, we'll go to this place and we'll serve people communion. Like, we'll get them all rounded up and he'll push them back to the rooms or whatever. And the easiest sermons that I ever preach any week, because they can't hear what I'm saying. So I just, I'll stand up there and talk and, oh yeah, good, amen, amen. Now, most of them sleep, and so then I'll break the bread and I'll do the wine. And what's really cool though is like right when I start the Lord's Prayer, like they're like this and like, Our Father, who art in heaven. They got that part down. You do it for 80 or 90 years, like you get it down. And there's this woman who was there, and every time she asked me this for like 3 years, like, when I die, will you do my funeral? Like, what do you say? Like, no, I'm not going to do your funeral. I'm too busy. Oh yeah, I'll do your funeral. Hopefully it's not anytime soon, but yeah, I'll do your funeral for you. So one day I got a call. It was a Monday, and it's a funeral director, and like this is like central Nebraska, and like he's saying that so and so has died, and I'm like, who is that? Like, is it someone in our church? And she goes, no. Her daughter said that you're the guy that goes to the nursing home and serves her communion, and you said you'd do her funeral. I said, all right, well, when is it? He goes, Thursday. I got the numbers, and Wednesday night I went and washed my car. I always wash my car before I do a funeral. I had to drive like 2 hours to do this funeral. It wasn't like a short little jaunt. I get to this little Lutheran church, was meeting some of the family, and I did not know this, but her mom was still alive. She was like probably in her early 80s. I'm putting her mom like well over 100 here. So during the funeral, the mom was actually on the inside seat. There was like a great-grandson that was next to her. There was like this little guy that was like probably 3 or 4 that was next to him, and then there's like some daughters and sons, I think. And at the end of the funeral, this great-grandson, he's probably 14 or 15, he got up and he sang one of the most beautiful renditions of Amazing Grace that I have ever heard. It was just powerful. The little squirmy guy, he had kind of moved down there. So I looked out there, and this woman, who's probably about 100 years old, was all by herself. There's about 5 or 6 feet between her and, the next person. And I said to myself, like, no one, and she was like, it was hard for her. This was her baby. It had been her baby for 80 years. And I said, no one should have to sit by themselves during something like this. And I got up. I got up out of the chair. I walked down the steps, and I sat right beside her. I put my arm around her. She put her little head on my shoulder, and I just held her. Now just think about that for a second. Like, in your suffering, in your pain, with our dysfunction, like, we shouldn't be alone. We can't be alone. There has to be someone who's with us. And the good news is you don't have a perfect pastor and very imperfect pastor who's coming to rescue you. You have the creator of the world who's coming to rescue you. You have the one who always has been, always will be, who is coming to rescue you. You're not going to be alone. God's presence is near. It's right here, and the kingdom of God is among us. And I remember there was a time, this was in 1998, I was a youth pastor in Atlanta, Georgia. And there was this kid that came up to me after church, and I could tell like he really wanted to talk about something. Never met him before. I knew his parents, it turned out. And he said, hey, my mom and dad really respect you, and I need your help with something. So I said, sure, what is it? Now, this is not about any political statement or theological statement. Just put that to rest right now. This is about a family and a child. That's the only thing the story's about. Like, this kid came up to me, and I call him a kid. I was like 24, and he was probably like 22 or something. He said, over the last few years, I've discovered that I'm gay, and I have to tell my parents. I just can't deal with it anymore. It's just messing me up inside, and I got to tell them. I can't do it. He says, will you come with me and help me do this? Now, I have this core belief that if anybody suffers, they shouldn't have to suffer alone. And without hesitation, I said yes. We met at a restaurant, and he said, my parents are expecting me. It was him at 6 o'clock, or I think it was 7 o'clock. So when your son and the pastor get to your house, something's going on. Anxiety all of a sudden filled the house, and you could have heard a pin drop on that tile floor. They're like, Craig, what are you doing here? I says, well, we need to talk. Can we all go have a seat? And he had this long speech that he was going to give, and he read it to me, and he just looked at him and said, I'm gay. He looked at me, looked at them, they looked at each other, they looked at me, they looked at him. This is a surprise to the parents, and the parents, they looked at me, the dad especially, and he actually said, what do you think? I said, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm just going to tell you what I know. I know he's your son. So then the dad got up, and I had no idea what was going to happen. He grabbed his wife by the hand. They walked over and found their son. And they all just hugged and embraced. Now, any of you ever lived in the South before? So what does an adult male call his dad in the South? You guys know? Someone at the first service knew. You call him daddy. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you're 5 years old, if you're 55, you call your dad daddy. And I just remember, I was an observer to this, and the dad looked at the son, and he just said, you're always going to be my son. And the kid, he just goes, daddy, daddy, daddy. Now, that has nothing to do with politics or theology. It just has to do with a family. And it's just an illustration that when we're hurting the most, do you know what we need the most? Daddy. Daddy. We need our heavenly parent who is always going to be there for us. Let's go back to that verse from James chapter 4, verse 8. Listen to what it says. Come close to God, and God will come close to you. And I want you to hear this. If you're suffering because of some decisions and some stuff that you make, come close to God, and God will come close to you. God's presence is near, and His kingdom is here. If we've made, if we're just suffering for no reason, if we're one of those unfortunate people that just is suffering, and you're here because I see you. And even if I don't know your story, I know that there's more than enough of us here that this is dozens of us. If you're suffering because you didn't do anything, come near to God, and God will come near to you. God's presence is near, and the kingdom of heaven is here. So let's pray.